Good afternoon and welcome to Queer Town Hall, the Ballot Edition. I'm so excited about today's episode. We will have three amazing women who all play key roles in Oregon politics, and we're going to have a great conversation about what's on the ballot and how everyone watching can be involved in these last two crucial weeks before the election. Today's episode is really a chance to ask all those questions you have about what's happening on your ballot, those tough decisions to make. So please ask your questions via the YouTube chat. And as always, everyone who shares a comment or question or makes a donation to cover the cost of live captioning for accessibility can be entered to win one of our great Protect Trans Kids tote bags. And I have to say, one of the best things about wearing this t-shirt or carrying the tote bag is having 14-year-olds coming up to me and saying thank you. And just carrying that message helps trans kids feel seen, which is great and important. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about today's episode. And even if you've already filled out your ballot, I think we'll have a great, interesting conversation. So thank you, Shemia Fagan. Thank you, Becca, for being on today's episode. And we're just going to get started with my favorite icebreaker of the fall, which is why don't you share with us your name, your pronouns, a little bit about what you do, and what's your favorite TV show or book or activity that's helping get you through this pandemic. And I always start in alphabetical order, so I will start with you, Becca.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thanks for having me be a part of this awesome thing y'all are doing. I'm Becca Uherbelau, is she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of Our Oregon. We're a political nonprofit that focuses on democracy and access to the ballot with kind of a specialty, a niche around ballot measures. And my thing that I'm doing to get through the pandemic, our family is playing a lot of board games, which sometimes admittedly doesn't end well, right? But it starts out great. We got one called Pandemic, which some days it's a little too on the nose, but I'd recommend it. And I have to say recently, what's getting me through is gourds. Like, I am a seasonal decorator, and I've never in my life spent so much money on gourds, and I have no shame about it.
That's great. I'm a little surprised, but you know, gourds are great. Get your fall on. That's awesome. Shemia?
Well, hey there. I am Shemia Fagan. I use she, her pronouns. And what I do, first and foremost, is I'm a mom. I've got an 8-year-old and a 3.5-year-old. And right now I'm therefore also a second grade teacher, preschool teacher, custodian, lunch lady, recess monitor, but also I'm a civil rights attorney, managing partner of a law firm here in Portland, and a state senator, and I am the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State. And so I'm also running for office. The thing that's kept me going through the pandemic, a lot of I'm actually a bit of a homebody anyway, so I'd already been working from home as an attorney for many years, let my legal assistant work from home. But having my son home for school is really the part that reminds me every day that we are in a pandemic. And so I made a decision a couple months ago that if this was going to be maybe the only year that I am so intimately involved with his education, that I was going to kind of take some control of it during the election. So I went to Barnes & Noble and got some great books on history, but like an accurate, good, fair view of history. Some social justice books about kind of anti-racism, but kind of for a middle school age, and then democracy, but from a perspective of, kind of criticizing things like the Electoral College, not just saying this is how it works. And so at the end of every day, when all of his little second grade friends are done with school, he does an hour of history, democracy, and social justice with mom. And then he watches the presidential debates with me and takes notes. And then I let him watch Saturday Night Live because I feel like that's the reward for a second grader, that he gets to watch the cold opens to Saturday Night Live. So that is what I have been doing mostly. And books that I've been getting through, I just started listening. I'm a big audiobook listener to The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. And it is, it's like you thought you were woke before, and then you're like, oh, she's like a shot of, fully caffeinated coffee in terms of really seeing things. So I'm really enjoying that book.
That's great. Yeah, I haven't read that one, but definitely, I think we all had our first bell hooks moments. Yeah, she's fantastic. And our oh, we already have a question, which is for Becca, asking where you're getting your gourds.
Oh, well, it's a combination of some borrowing from neighbors, with permission, of course, and then we go to not the pumpkin patch on Sauvie Island, but Bella Organics.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. Oh, I see we have Felisa, who is having some technical difficulties, but was able to get in, and your perfect timing for the first question, which is your name, your pronouns, and one thing that's helping you get through this pandemic. It could be a TV show, it could be a movie, it could be a book, it could be whiskey, it could be gourds. Feel free to chime on in. Oh. Okay, looks like we're still having a little bit of a technical issue, and that is fine. Felisa, we'll get back to you, but I'm going to go ahead and get started on the first question, because I think that one thing that I'm so excited about, this is just like, I just feel like in Oregon, we have so many strong women in politics, and I am inspired every day by everything you all do, and excited to work with you. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how you first got engaged and how you first got involved. And so would you mind starting us off again, Becca?
Sure, just coming off mute. How did I get involved? Well, I usually would say this to my therapist, but I blame my mother. So I think she took me to the first ERA march when in a stroller. And then she made a choice, and somewhat reluctantly, to run for the Oregon State Legislature when I was 19. But the condition was that she wouldn't do it without her girls. So my sister and I have been actively engaged in politics since a young age. And we saw firsthand what it looked like to have a strong woman lead. And I've just kind of stuck around ever since.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Did your mom win?
She did, and this is actually a perfect example of how every vote counts. She won her first election by 54 votes, went into an automatic recount. We were all biting our nails. So, and this is in Southern Oregon, and it was, kind of a mixed district. So ever since then, I have absolutely, sworn by the every vote counts, because it really does. A lot of these races, local races, legislative races, are really close.
Yeah, that's great. And how about you, Shemia? How did you first decide to get engaged in politics?
Well, my family probably was very opposite of Becca. So my dad was very political growing up, but very, very Republican. And so I was always kind of aware of politics, thought it might be something that I would run for someday, but I thought it was something that you do in your 50s or 60s or 70s. And I remember in 2008 being relatively new back to Oregon after having done grad school away and college away. And I remember seeing Brent Barton's TV ads during the 2008 elections for House District 51. I remember thinking, that guy's my age. And so I was like, oh, I didn't think of this. And then, of course, that was the year that a lot of young men in their 30s, 20s for Brent, 20s and 30s got elected. And so I started Googling, how do you run for office? And I found a autobiographical book called Women Run by Jewel Lansing. I had no idea that she was from Oregon when I first ordered the book. Started reading it and realized that she had run for office in Oregon, the first woman to run for statewide office as state treasurer. She didn't win, but she was the first woman to run for statewide office. And so then I ended up Googling her, and that's how I found Emerge Oregon. And I think I got my application in right towards the end of the application deadline. Had no idea we had a state legislature. Just like was very, very new. Thought canvassing was when you like stand at the corner of 17th and Powell with a sign on election day. And so had a really amazing first Emerge class. Jennifer Williamson, Val Hoyle, Ann Leiniger, some incredible, incredible people in that first Emerge class, and ran for school board in 2011, and we've been off to the races ever since.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, it's incredible. I think like I remember like my first lobby day, which I went to in 1997, right? Like it just felt like all these like old men, but then there were some bright spots of strong women in politics, and it was really inspiring to see them and get to know them a little bit with my baby lobbying. So yeah, that's great. And so it is really exciting, Shemia, that you're running for Secretary of State, which is a big role in our state, but one that a lot of people don't understand. So do you want to share a little bit about why you're running and a little?
In terms of why I'm running, as I mentioned, I grew up in a Republican household. My dad was actually a single parent. So I grew up in little towns in Wasco County in the Dalles and Dufur. And my mom battled meth and opioid addiction and was homeless for most of my life. And so my dad raised us as a single parent. I had two older brothers and my dad. And, you know, we struggled very much to make ends meet. In fact, the summer before I started second grade, my dad took us on a camping trip, a couple weeks in the woods. I remember catching crawdads and sleeping in a big family tent. And it wasn't until several years later that my older brothers told me what had really happened, that we had been evicted from our house in the Dalles and we had nowhere to go. And so we were homeless, but my dad didn't want us to know. And so he took us camping while he tried to find us a place to live. And so it's experiences like that that have led me, as both a civil rights attorney and an Oregon lawmaker, working with folks like Felisa Hagins, who is still having technical difficulties. Oh, she at least heard that because she smiled. There we go. To fight for folks who are hanging on by a thread, passing things like statewide rent stabilization, raising the minimum wage, paid sick leave, and also creating the Office of Small Business Assistance, which was actually the first bill I ever chief co-sponsored that created that office right in the Secretary of State's office. But I've also been at the forefront of every major expansion of voting rights here in Oregon during my time in the legislature, from automatic voter registration to the National Popular Vote Compact, which I won't go into, but if folks have a Q&A, I can nerd the hell out on the National Popular Vote, but I will spare you, and then prepaid postage. But you're right, Nancy, when I first announced my campaign for Secretary of State, I quickly learned that most people have no idea what the hell this job is. One of my older brothers, I was like, hey, I'm going to run for Secretary of State. And he was like, awesome. So you'll get other people's coffee? Like, no idea. And so I always at least like to start there without assuming what other people know, which is number one, that it is, we audit state revenues and programs to make sure they make a real difference in the lives of people who need them most. Potentially conducting legislative redistricting this year, but using a people's commission that is rooted in racial equity, conducting public records in a way that is open and transparent and accountable, running that Office of Small Business Assistance that I mentioned. And last, and certainly not least, is running elections that are fair and secure. And so intriguing this time because I've been on a lot of national calls and people will say, oh my gosh, what's it like to be in Oregon with vote by mail? And I've always said, well, vote by mail in Oregon is the most boring topic in Oregon politics because it has worked so well for so long. We don't talk about vote by mail. Like, until the president came after, I don't think I'd ever talked about vote by mail. And so it's one of those things that, we've really had to shore up and show, like, oh, actually, this works really, really well, and combat the claims of voter fraud that obviously the president puts out there, because he knows they're a myth. He just wants to use claims of voter fraud to make it hard for people to vote. So that's where I'm coming from, and super excited about the next 14 days.
Yeah, it is run. We're all running, I think, to get through the next 2 weeks. And so let's talk a little bit about the races that everyone is watching closely in Oregon. It just feels like, of course, we're going to get to some of the national politics, but yeah, I just would love to hear about what races and what's exciting to you that's on the ballot. And do you want to start, Becca?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned before, we kind of specialize at our Oregon and Ballot Measures. So, and we've been putting together a voter guide for the past 14 years. And this is only the second time in our history of doing such a thing that we have been able, along with our coalition partners, to come out with a full yes slate. So if you haven't already, you should receive a voter guide in the mail from our Oregon and our coalition partners. So the ballot measure slate is exciting. It really, if you look at it in total from statewide to local measures, it's really both a commitment and investment in people, working families, and services, and also looking at our systems and how they need to change. So I'd say the ballot measures in general are exciting to me. And then in terms of a candidate race, our Oregon doesn't do candidate work, but personally, I've been following Felisa Fagan's race in Washington County. She's running for Washington County Commission, a 22-year-old public health expert and a working mom. And I think that she'd be a wonderful elected official and bring a much needed voice to the county commission.
Yeah, that's great. She is awesome. I got to know her a few years ago in one of our programs at Western State Center, and she's great. Yeah, and the ballot measures, do you have one that's particularly close to your heart?
Well, let me just do a quick run through. Maybe I don't know how much.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Shared on the town hall. So on the statewide measures, there are two legislative referrals that we in our coalition are supporting. One is a amendment to the Constitution that would allow for campaign finance and spending limitations. So this is, if you want to learn more about that, you can go to fairandhonestelections.org. And then the other legislative referral is the first ever tax on nicotine vape to help stop youth vaping, as well as bringing in Oregon's tobacco or cigarette tax in alignment with Washington and California, and would bring much needed investment into Oregon health plan that serves 1 million Oregonians, including 400,000 kids. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to yeson108.org. Another statewide ballot measure that folks, regardless of where they live in Oregon, will get the opportunity to vote on is Measure 109, which provides a breakthrough therapeutic service to Oregonians who are suffering from anxiety and depression, and establishes a psilocybin treatment program that is very regulated. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to vote yes on 109.org. And then the last statewide ballot measure is Measure 110. And I think you've had some folks on your previous town halls who shared their personal stories about how meaningful this measure would be for them. And so what that does, it expands services available to folks who are struggling with addiction, and low-level drug possession will be considered a civil infraction. If you want to learn more about that measure, go to vote yes on 110.org. And there's a bunch of local measures. If you have, if you're in the metro area, there's the Let's Get Moving campaign, which was a referral from the Metro Council that provides necessary investments in our transportation system. There is in Multnomah County, there's a Preschool for All, which allows access to preschool for parents across the county. There's also a library bond. There's also, if you live within the city of Portland, there's a Portland Public Schools bond that is reinvesting in schools. And then City of Portland, there's the Police Accountability Measure, as well as Portland Parks. I'm sure that I'm missing. Oh, and there's also a children's levy in Clackamas County for those of you who live in Clackamas County. So that's kind of the rundown of a bunch that have been on my mind, and a bunch that are already endorsed by a bunch of our coalition partners.
That's great. Thanks for that. Felisa, are you able to?
I think so. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you. We can hear you. You're good. You're good.
Dominic really helped me out. I really appreciate this.
That's great. So yeah, why don't you introduce yourself, your name, your pronoun, where you work, what you do there, and Yeah, and we'll get to the next. We'll let you answer this question. Which race are you excited about? That's on the November ballot in Oregon.
Yeah, my name is Felisa Hagins. I'm the political director for the Service Employees International Union, Local 49, and we represent industrial laundry workers, janitors, security officers, hospital caregivers, and hospital workers, clinic workers. So really people who have recently been very much on the front lines of the COVID-19 fight, and literally dealing with both COVID and the spread of COVID with people's laundry and cleaning up after people. So, and I am lucky enough to do politics for them. So working for them to make sure that their endorsements come to fruition and that those elected leaders then are held to a standard of accountability when it comes to working class people. And I feel really lucky and proud to do that work for them. So when it comes to races that I'm watching based on that is, obviously my senator is running for Secretary of State, Shemia Fagan. And so we are watching the Secretary of State's race very, very closely because I think it's so critical to, if that's the public sector workers in SEIU and making sure that they have a voice in audits and making government function better, to being the lieutenant governor in our state. And what that really means long-term for us, as we saw with the appointment of Kate Brown. I think, the other piece that's kind of a nerd piece is the treasurer's race, and Tobias Reed is running there. And, I think Tobias Reed has been a longtime champion, both of working people and the LGBTQIA community. And I think a lot of people don't think of investments as super sexy, but Tobias oversees a huge fund. And, I think it is one of the ways that both of Basic Rights Oregon and us have been able to push an agenda forward with corporate accountability when it comes to worker accountability, when it comes to socially responsible investments, when it comes to looking at investing in companies who don't have a track record of abusing workers or taking advantage of certain communities, BIPOC communities, the LGBTQIA community. So the treasurer's race is something we take a look at. And then I think Becca pointed out a lot of local government races I'm super jazzed about. The city of Beaverton has some folks running there that I'm really excited about. Nadia Hassan, who is running in an open seat there that was just created, a Muslim American woman running to be elected to the city of Beaverton. And the city of Beaverton is the most diverse city in our state. So that's an exciting thing to look at. City of Portland races are always interesting. It's like running a statewide race in a little microcosm, frankly. It was just created. And to wrap it up, the ballot measure that I am two ballot measures that are near to dear to my heart right now, especially as a Black woman in America, is the ballot measure 110, which I think will really reduce the criminalization of addiction issues and health issues, as well as the meaning that could have on communities that look like me, as well as the Portland Police Reform Initiative. And so both of those, I'm hoping that we can count on voters to come through and pass.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Yeah, as people know, because we spent a whole hour talking about Measure 110 last week, it's very dear to my heart because it is so important. I feel like the racial justice aspect of what it means to decriminalize possession is so huge, and the number of people who are in prisons right now because of possession is really appalling. And especially when you think about who gets pulled over, who gets asked to empty their pockets out without search warrants, all of those things. It's so important. And so our future Secretary of State, Shemia Fagan, what races are you watching?
Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. We're definitely working really hard to make that the case. And running your first time statewide is challenging. That is one challenge. I did not realize how tough it is to get your name out there, particularly in a year when the national stories are so sensational that folks are really kind of almost at their limit of what they can absorb and retain. So obviously, aside from my seat, I mean, I don't want to be repetitive, but both Becca and Felisa mentioned essentially so many races and ballot measures that I'm watching. So I'll just mention a few others, which is some essentially the legislative candidates that are out there running to try and pick up 2 more seats for the Democrats in the Senate and 2 more seats for the Democrats in the House, which we never thought we'd have to talk about things like a quorum-proof majority. But as we saw last year, I think totally 5 times between the House and the Senate, Republicans just walking off the job and taxpayers continuing to pay their salaries while they just literally, in some cases, fled the state, hid from the Oregon State Police, in one case threatened the Oregon State Police on television. And so, I want to get back to a day where obviously, folks can disagree and get there and debate and be part of the process and sometimes vote no, but not just shut down the whole process. And so I really am curious watching the races that will potentially give the Democratic caucus in the Senate and the House quorum-proof majorities, just so our government can function. As folks know, if you've ever worked with folks, both in the Republican or Democratic caucuses, there is a wide spectrum of beliefs and views and geographic areas represented within those caucuses. So I have no, illusions that 40 Democrats in the House or 20 in the Senate would somehow create this cohesive. I mean, there's lots of disagreements and differences, but what we would get is a functioning government, which I think is number one and what people need, and not having folks shut down the government over all kinds of stuff. So that's what I'm watching. And then I'll also just mention on a slightly nerdy angle, not so much a candidate that I'm watching, but an election I'm watching is the Benton County Commission race, which is the first race in Oregon that will be using ranked choice voting, which is a very exciting innovation in voting that has a lot of promise in terms of helping just basically get rid of some of the cynicism in politics where folks feel like they're forced to choose between 2 candidates they maybe don't like and they prefer to choose somebody else, but then they worry about spoiler candidates or wasting their vote or all these other terms. And so Benton County, for those that don't know, is doing their county commission races this year via ranked choice voting. And so for folks that want to know more about that, we can do the Q&A, but I'm definitely watching that race. And I will note that there's also some great candidates running that are running in really tough races. Karina Miller down in Southern Oregon, Paige Hook in the Staten area, Arlene Burns out in my hometown of Wasco County. And so these are folks that have really, really tough races. And, they go into these races knowing they'd be really hard to win, but boy, do they work their asses off. And I just want them to get a lot of credit for continuing to go out there and at least in those areas, allowing those folks to feel like they at least have someone to vote for, even if those races are tougher to win. So
that's great. Thanks. And we actually have gotten a question about ranked choice voting. So people want to nerd out with you. And they note that, it's happening in Benton County. It's happening in Maine. So do you think it could work for all of Oregon?
Well, I'm going to be first off, I hope so. I think it's a really exciting innovation. I saw it play out a little bit in the election in February, the Nevada caucuses. So my Aunt Marty, who folks know, she comes up a lot of elections. She's very close. We're very close. She is in Las Vegas. And so I usually go there during the elections and volunteer for the caucuses. And this year they allowed people to caucus and vote early and to use ranked choice voting, essentially to say, okay, this is my first choice, my second choice, my third choice. And the idea is that if your first choice didn't get the 15% required in the caucus, then they would kind of push that away and they would go to your second choice. And it was just cool. My Aunt Marty had a thing for Tom Steyer. She loved her some Tom Steyer. So she's like, I don't think he's going to win, but I just want to be able to vote for him. And it's just amazing to watch her not have to, have that angst of being a political pundit instead of just being a voter and vote for the people that inspire you and that you believe in their vision and that you believe care about people like you and your family. And so, Tom Steyer was not viable in her precinct. And so it went to her second choice but I just think it's a really promising innovation. As the questioner mentioned, Maine has been doing it statewide for a number of years. And so I think that I am very excited about it. I want to look at what happened in Benton County. It has shown promising results in other places about increasing turnout. I think our big lens will always be an equity lens to make sure it doesn't create a chasm between high information and low information voters. We don't want to make it more difficult for people to vote in ways that, voting sometimes already feels confusing. And so I think that that's the educational component can't be overemphasized. But yeah, it's an innovation I'm very open to and really excited to look at the results in Benton County.
That's great. Thanks. And so obviously there's a lot of exciting things that we're watching in Oregon. What are folks looking at nationally? What campaigns are you keeping track of that are maybe in other states. Do you want to chime in first, Felisa?
Sure. I mean, there's this national election going on with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
That I hope people are still dug into. It's, I think just to tell a quick story is last night I was actually making phone calls for Shemia Fagan, and I got a wrong number, and the woman was in Minnesota. She was like, "Oh, I'm not in Oregon, I'm in Minnesota," and I was like, "Are you voting for Joe Biden?" And so I conveniently switched, and she's going to volunteer for Joe Biden this weekend. So we talked about that, signed her up online while I was on the phone with her. I think, I'm really watching. I feel like obviously the national election, which we could talk about for a whole full hour or days, but I also feel like watching the United States Senate races and what's happening around the country regarding the Senate races. We have, I think from Kentucky and what's happening there, and we all have our hopes and dreams to see if Amy can pull it out in Kentucky. And, I think there's a lot of options in the Senate, and we didn't feel like, at least I personally didn't feel like last year there was a hope of taking back the Senate, and now there's actually a shot. I mean, Montana, North Carolina. So I do feel like those Senate races are really critical in what we've seen as an obstructionist government in the U.S. Senate that has no interest in getting things done for people. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, for sure. Becca, what are you following? What do you think?
I would just plus one to Felisa on the U.S. Senate. I have to tell you, sometimes looking at the national landscape is depressing, right? But there are these rays of hope. The Lindsey Graham, Jamie Harrison race is giving me a lot of joy. One, because it's actually like legitimate and real. I think they were like both polling at 48%. And, Lindsey Graham is pleading for help on the airwaves, which also brings me joy. So I'm hoping that, that's going to go the right way at the end of the day.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm also Jamie Harrison and AOC are the only, and besides the Democratic presidential candidates, the only people outside of our state politically that I'm giving my money to, because it's important. Also, that moment where Jamie Harrison put up the plexiglass shield in the debate was so iconic. I'm just a huge fan. Shemia, what about you?
Well, I will echo what Becca and Felisa said. Obviously, Biden-Harris I'm super excited. Kamala Harris was one of my absolute favorites in the primary. I have the Harris shirt. I have the Harris hat. So she was people I donated to monthly. But for no other reason, we got to have Maya Rudolph on SNL for the next 4 years, maybe the next, who knows, 12 years. But yeah, she is just so good playing. I don't know about Jim Carrey. Jury's still out for me on how Jim Carrey's doing as Joe Biden, but Maya Rudolph has nailed the Kamala Harris impression. I would echo Jamie Harrison. In fact, we share a TV consultant, so I feel like I always get a little bit of the inside stuff with Jamie Harrison. I'm sure that our TV consultant makes a whole lot more money on Jamie Harrison than he does on Shemia Fagan, but I still feel like I get first-class treatment. But yeah, Jamie Harrison, I religiously follow. Felisa, who probably knows me the best on this call, knows I'm a huge data nerd, and I am a 538 obsessive follower, and they give Jamie Harrison a 22% chance of winning, which they will very much emphasize is not nothing. That means, they run their simulation in their model 40,000 times, and 22% of those times, even under the current conditions, Jamie Harrison could win that. So with conditions going very, very well for Biden on election night, yes, we can make sure that he wins. And so, but I want to actually add onto those. We do have a real race down in CD4 in Oregon this year with Congressman DeFazio. He's probably got his toughest race that he's had. So folks have a chance to work with the Democratic Party of Oregon and do some calling into DeFazio's district. We need that. He has his opponent is getting a lot of money, both dark money and other money. And having talked recently with Congressman Blumenauer, a scary scenario that we've all considered facing is if the presidential election isn't called in time and it would go to the House of Representatives. And again, I won't nerd out too deeply on this. I'll just tell you it's not each state gets a vote in the House. So it matters which states have a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans. And so the House, which everyone's kind of like, oh, who cares about the House? We're definitely going to keep the House. We're going to keep the House, but there's a couple of key seats we need to flip to where if the presidential election were to actually go to the House of Representatives, because Trump was filing a bunch of lawsuits, that we could have a fair result there and not just have the Republicans hand it back to Trump. So a little bit of a doomsday scenario, but one that I've heard now brought up on some legitimate phone calls of folks that are not conspiracy theorists. So certainly a reality that we need to at least consider this time with a president who's so unwilling to accept the outcome of fair democratic elections. So so many exciting races to follow.
Yeah, it's true. And if folks want to do more than follow, like, what are your suggestions? I mean, I think you already had one about volunteering with the Democratic Party. And yeah, other thoughts about how people could be engaged?
Well, I'll chime in as a candidate and just say that literally, no matter what your talents are, there's a place for you on a campaign. If calling folks, if you're not as outgoing as Felisa and calling folks makes you nervous, there's literally text banking. And I get text banks every once in a while. They have me in there as my name is Throng, Throng. So I don't know, they have somebody else's name. So I always reply to the folks that are text banking and say, hey, this is actually Shemia Fagan. But, I'm excited for, thanks for volunteering, text banking. We have a couple of folks from the Carpenters that are just literally driving around, kind of doing a lot of errands for us, like delivering lawn signs, picking up checks when we need them, just volunteering. So literally, no matter what your talents are, get a hold of the DPO and they will find something for you, because there is so much work to do and still not enough hands and minds to do it. So so definitely, whatever your talents are, get a hold of the DPO and they will find a place for you.
That's great. How about you, Felisa? How are you engaged? I know you're very engaged, but how are you getting people engaged and what are some options for folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually one of the really awesome things is we've always thought of elections as being located locally. And so it's been hard to volunteer nationally as well. And so I think the way with Zoom now and having an infrastructure is you can actually just go online and volunteer. If you wanted to make phone calls for Jamie Harris, you could actually go online and sign up to make some phone calls for them. You could, get out the vote in Ohio now. And so there's a couple of different ways. As I think one, I can mobilize. USA has a lot of these signups for events that's online that you can go to, and I'll put the link in the chat. The other thing that you can do, which I think is great, is I just saw this thing where you can sign up to donate to deliver pizzas or whatever on election day to people who are standing in line. So I think that I know it's hard for me to imagine such a barbaric activity, but apparently that happens throughout states, throughout our country. Hopefully we can put a national end to that where everybody can vote by mail. But until then, with this inhumane practice, we should deliver those people food and lawn chairs to sit in. I think the next thing is donate to a campaign. I think a lot of times right now, I know with COVID and people are like, I've got kids in school and I've got like this going on and I've got this going on. I think, you think about just a small amount of money, if that's to the Basic Rights Oregon PAC, which contributes to a lot of different candidates who support this work and support a community of people who need activism and who need political people to stand on their side. If that's directly to folks like Senator Shemia Fagan or directly to a ballot measure, that $5, $10, $50 buys a Facebook ad, buys some time, helps pay for a staff person who's going to do some of the work that volunteers don't do. So there's a ton of ways to get involved.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. I didn't even ask you to do that, but you can always donate to the Equality PAC. So how about you, Becca? What are ways that you see people being involved and ways that you're engaging folks?
So yes to all of the above, right? My favorite moments ever working campaigns is the unsolicited volunteer call, someone who actually calls you up and says, I'd like to phone bank or deliver lawn signs. So don't be shy. Just, Google the campaign you want to engage in and call them up. And you will never feel so welcome and well received as if you're an unsolicited volunteer. The only other thing I would add to these incredibly good ideas about engaging is please don't be shy in letting your friends and family know how you're voting. I mean, we've seen that that is actually one of the most influential activities that someone could do, just in terms of reminding people to vote, and also being a validator for your friends and family and coworkers, and share how you're voting and why.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I feel very flattered when people ask me my opinion on how they should vote. And especially when it comes to, there's some pretty tight races going on, especially in Portland right now. So I know you're all political nerds, and so you're going to really love this question because it's about redistricting, which is so important. But there's a question: are we getting a 6th congressional district, and what are we going to do with it? Becca, you want to go first?
I think the answer to the first question is yes, and the answer to the second part of that question is it's up to us, right? I think I really appreciate Senator Fagan's approach about engaging the folks who have honestly been kept out of our democracy and who don't have the kind of representation they need and deserve in our government, and engaging those folks in helping to draw the lines and inform what those maps look like.
Yeah, that's great. Any other thoughts about our 6th congressional district?
I'll just add that this is a little bit different than legislative redistricting, which is in the Oregon Constitution, and the legislature has until July 1 to get that done. I'm blanking on the exact date that by statute they have. It's sometime in August that they have to get a congressional district done. And then if they don't, it would actually go to a judicial panel that's seated by the Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court. So it's unlikely that congressional districts would come to the Secretary of State, except for if the map that was put together by the judicial panel somehow got challenged and I had to fix it, which would be unlikely because it's a judicial panel, and there would be the Supreme Court that would then be saying it needed to be fixed. So it's unlikely the Secretary of State will be involved in congressional redistricting. But as Becca said, yeah, like whoever is doing it, and I'm hoping that if it is something that comes to me, because as folks know, the census has been very controversial this year. The president has, there's mixed messages on whether or not he can or can't stop the counting. The Supreme Court, I believe, said they issued an injunction, but they didn't actually rule on it. It's very complicated. The bottom line is there's probably going to be litigation over the census. So the data may not even get to the states until after the July deadline for the Oregon legislature. So it may be something that we know early on is going to be done by the Secretary of State. And I've been working with President Obama and Eric Holder's group, the National Democratic Redistricting Commission, as a way to do that. That would create a model for the nation of what an independent commission that's rooted in racial justice could look like, a people's commission. And so, and I'm hoping that if that were to happen, that essentially the Oregon Supreme Court would also, follow some of those same principles and root that commission in independent or in racial historically underrepresented communities.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and folks, that's why we've been asking folks to fill out their census for the past year, because it is so important. And it'll be huge for Oregon to get that congressional seat. Sorry, New York. I think that's who's losing one. Not sure. We don't know yet.
And I'll add, Nancy, again, as a bit of a nerd, but when we get an extra congressional seat, we also get an extra electoral vote. So that would mean in the next presidential election, Oregon would have 8 electoral votes, not 7 electoral votes. But yeah, that does depend on the census. I mean, who knows what has been counted so far. Obviously, we need to have those accurate counts in order to make sure we do get that additional congressional district.
Yeah, so important. So let's think a little bit about just going back. I know we did a quick overview of some of the ballot measures, but I feel like there's a lot about honestly, like addiction and drugs that are on this with, Measure 107 being, or 108 being about the tobacco tax and vaping, and 109 being about psilocybin, and 110, building more resources for addiction and decriminalizing possession. It just feels like an issue that's so important in our state, and all of them have their own controversies, but let's delve in a little bit more. Do you I know we've already talked a little bit about Measure 110, but I don't know that much about Ballot Measure 109. Becca, can you fill us in again about what that does exactly?
Sure. So what it does is it allows access to Oregonians who are, again, suffering from anxiety and depression, access to this therapy. It establishes psilocybin therapy in a strict licensing program to address Oregon's mental health crisis. It established a regulatory framework within the Oregon Health Authority. And in fact, it imposes a 2-year development period before approving the first license to a licensed practitioner. And what else can I tell you? It has an advisory, so an oversight board appointed by the governor. There's all of these checks and balances. Again, this is a mental health service that's going to be offered in a safe and regulated environment.
Yeah, thanks. It seems like there's been some studies that have shown that it's actually pretty successful, and it's not, it's not your parking lot shrooms for folks who may have been going to concerts back in the day, some Fish, some Grateful Dead, whatever your, so it seems important. I think that there's use around like PTSD and treatment for PTSD, and for end of life care that's really interesting to me. So it seems pretty different.
Nancy, do you mind? One of the things around ballot measures that's important for folks to understand is, we're hearing this vote early message from the presidential campaign to local campaigns, and yes, please turn in your ballot. But I do want to emphasize, be thoughtful and take your time, because some of the times when folks vote early, they may skip ballot measures that seem complicated. So a couple things. One is, please make sure to do your research. If you're looking at statewide ballot measures as well as the statewide candidates, you can go to theoregonvoterguide.com, and it provides you with information about the 4 statewide ballot measures and the 3 statewide candidates, their stance on issues, and then who's endorsing the campaign. So that's a great resource. So that's the only thing I would, of course, vote early, but make sure to be thoughtful and mindful about it. And then I'll just share a little piece of information. As of this morning, we had over 250,000 Oregonians cast a ballot, which is unprecedented. That's about 9% of the registered voters in Oregon. And this time in the 2018 midterm election, we had about 1% of folks voting. So if this is any indication of general turnout or enthusiasm for voting early, it's just super, super exciting to see folks cast a ballot.
Yeah, that is exciting. And I just wanted to point out, in everyone's ballot, beyond your ballot, you actually get a pretty lengthy description. And then, go to organizations you trust and see what they say about different ballot measures and how they're looking for you. And then and just to touch back, Felisa, I don't know if you how SEIU, when you're really centering working families and working folks, how you're thinking about all the ballot measures as an organization and with your base.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our members take a look at both and have a pretty extensive process, both with candidates and ballot measures. I think each of the ballot measures really has gone through our board, and I think one of the 2 questions we often ask is, how does this impact working people? And how does this improve the lives of ourselves, but also our communities? And so when you're looking at tobacco tax, for example, and the vaping increase, that really is about funding healthcare and and tobacco prevention for, hundreds of thousands of Oregonians who are on the Oregon Health Plan, and so critical for working families. Over 60% of children in Oregon are born on Medicaid. If you think about a great impact around what that means for communities, that's huge. And that number is even higher for communities of color. So a big impact. The Oregon Health Plan has an incredible impact on our community and on our jobs in particular, for workers who work in the hospitals and clinics, nursing homes, making sure that people are being able to be covered by Medicaid. When you look at Measure 110, for example, the biggest impact of the drug war has been on low-income people. And we've seen those communities suffer the consequences of that through a whole variety of things: over policing, under resources, pushing money from community-based resources into our criminal justice system, as well as, we have healthcare workers who see and work with people who have addiction. I think from our perspective, the criminal justice system, and from a hospital worker's perspective, the criminal justice system is not a place to work through treatment. It's to work in a medical or a community-based setting where you can get the care and support that you need to help with your addiction issues. So, and we've put a bunch of money into a failed system around drug enforcement. So let's make a change on that. And I think that's what our members think a lot about. And I think that the same is true, interesting, for the Portland Commission on Police Oversight and Daycare for All in Multnomah County. One of the biggest struggles of hospital workers during the COVID-19 pandemic is actually finding childcare based on what their shifts have changed to. You can work a 12-hour shift in a hospital. We've had respiratory therapists who've been on 24-hour shifts because of the COVID pandemic, and they're there working incredibly hard for our community to keep our community safe. Well, they have to make a decision about what happens to their children at home. And so, Preschool for All is something so critical and near and dear to our heart. And then Police Oversight Commission is really interesting because our healthcare workers came to it very quickly around, they have licensing boards. All of them have a licensing board. If they they're a licensed healthcare worker and they make a mistake in their job, they have a commission or a board where there's oversight about whether or not they'll continue to be able to practice in their field. It is a serious thing. They take their profession very seriously. And so I think it's something that they think should be expanded to other professions. And there should be a level of accountability, especially in a profession that has power and life or death consequences over communities. And so I'm always amazed and impressed how our workers take a look at the ballot measures and the issues that are on the ballot through that lens of what's good for us, what's good for our community, what's good for our patients, and make those decisions. So it's a great process to be involved in, and I'm super proud to be part of it.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's so important. And yeah, we hadn't talked about the preschool measure at all. Yeah, I think it's so, it's only Multnomah County, but I feel like it would be pretty huge and make a huge difference in people's lives. I know for myself, the first day at kindergarten, I was like, woohoo!
Yeah, kindergarten rich.
I felt very rich, but now there's no school and I'm having to pay for childcare again, but it all works out. So in our final 3 minutes, I'd love for everybody just to take a closeout minute. And why don't I start with you, Senator Fagan?
Well, first off, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time. This is, I'm optimistic. I know we're seeing incredible early vote numbers all across the country, including here in Oregon. And I know we constantly say this is the most important election of your lifetime, and hopefully we'll someday be able to look back with more boring candidates and say this one's not, that one was, but this one really is. I mean, as you know, when it comes to the U.S. Supreme Court, when it comes to just, are we going to accept a style of government that's purely obstructionist? It's there to kind of prove their point that government doesn't work, and then they have the power to shut it down and essentially, make what they had to say true by not allowing government to work. And so I think it's very important that, that we do vote. And as I have an older brother who, we don't typically see eye to eye on politics, but he's really recently come around and is very enthusiastically supporting Joe Biden. And he has, he's out in Umatilla County, and a lot of his friends are truckers. He's a diesel mechanic, and his friends are like, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll vote third party. And my brother's like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you're in Oregon, wherever you are, like, we need to deliver a message, not just to this president, but to this kind of politics, that we're not going to, this is not the kind of politics that we're going to have, that we could, long for the days of like the Mitt Romney Republicans again, not suggesting I would vote for them, but like there was at least a basic level of like humanity and decency in our debates. And so, I think that's the key, is no matter, where you are. I'm assuming most of these folks are in Oregon, but who knows where you are. It doesn't matter if you're in a safe state, vote for, please, vote for Joe Biden, vote for Kamala Harris. Let's deliver a message to this type of politics that our country is better than this, that Republicans are better than this, that our politics are better than this. And then we can get back to like, we can get back to a more civilized discussion where it's not just, sensational politics. We can make America boring again, make politics boring again. I'm sure we'd all love to eventually wake up and go weeks on a time without actually thinking about the president. I certainly would like to. So yeah, I just think it's important. Everybody get out, vote early, help other people vote, remind other folks what's at stake in this election.
Yes, thank you so much. And I just want to announce the tote bag winner, Chase Domjam Yuhas. You have won the tote bag. People will text you. Somehow that will work out. And we'll send it to you in the mail. And then, yeah, close us out. 1 minute each, Becca, and then Felisa.
Well, congratulations. I'm a little jealous about the tote bag. I'm just saying. I, like Senator Fagan, just want to make sure that everyone will absolutely exercise their hard-fought right to vote, and encourage everyone in your family to do the same. I did want to let folks know, if you have questions about your ballot, if you haven't received it, or you have questions about filling it out, you can go to oregonvotes.gov/myvote, especially if you haven't gotten a ballot, and they can give you either directly to your county elections office, or you can engage with the Secretary of State's office. So if you have ballot questions, go to oregonvotes.gov/myvote. If you have questions about ballot measures, statewide ballot measures, or statewide candidates, go to the OregonVoterGuide.com. And in terms of the ballot measures, I'm just really excited that Oregon, for the first time, I think, certainly in recent history, has the opportunity to affirmatively vote for ballot measures that will result in some really important system change to support families, and also some necessary investments in healthcare, schools, and other services.
Great, thank you. And Felisa, close us out for reals.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so sorry I was a technical nightmare on this thing, but I'm really happy to be here. And I've been thinking a lot lately about, there's Rogue One, which I love, is a Star Wars movie. And there's this line in the movie that revolutions are built on hope. And I think right now we have an opportunity to have incredible change in our country. And I think that voting is also a sign that you have hope. And I think for the last 4 years, what's been the biggest attack on us as an American people, frankly, has been the systematic stripping of our hope that we can be better. And I feel like you have this option that comes to your house in Oregon, or I know you're going to go stand in line if you're in another state, or hopefully you're already voting. And I feel like what's so critical for us, and especially for folks who may be part of marginalized communities, is we have to believe that tomorrow will be better than today. And so that's what your vote is about. And so if you believe that and you can keep that hope, then you have to cast a ballot. And you have to vote early, and you have to be involved, because tomorrow can be better than today. So I really appreciate you inviting us and doing all this, Nancy, and I'm super excited to vote.
Well, thank you. That's a perfect message to end on. I was actually having that conversation with my brother, and I was like, I feel like Jesse Jackson in the 80s because I'm all about keep hope alive. But that's where we are. Let's keep hope alive. Thank you all. Senator Fagan, Becca, Felisa, you're all amazing. Thank you for all the work you do to make Oregon great. And and like truly great. Like, we're a state that like people come to and see as a beacon because of all the work that you do. So thank you. And we'll see you all next time. Take care.